Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
ونعود إلى الموضوع الفلسطيني، فأمام تصاعد حدة التوتر داخل الأراضي الفلسطينية نظمت مؤسسات المجتمع المدني في رام الله اجتماعاً.
Amidst the escalating situation in the Palestinian territories, leaders of civil institutions held a meeting in Ramallah to discuss the internal fighting. While the threat of another Israeli incursion to the Gaza Strip is looming, tens of thousands of Palestinian citizens held demonstrations in the streets of the city protesting the security breakdown. We leave you with Majed Saeed in Ramallah.
The Palestinian civilian institutions have been monitoring the performance of the Palestinian Authority and criticized it in some occasions. But now they are calling for undivided authority and for everyone to abide by the law. These civilian institutions have been absent from the political process during the last period, but they have decided to look for ways that would allow them to be a part of resolving the internal division. This explains why they've held this meeting and emphasized the importance of unity and called for ending the internal conflict among the Palestinians.
There shouldn't be a power struggle among the different Palestinian factions in the streets, and the withdrawal from Gaza should not be used as an opportunity to serve the narrow interests of one party or another. I hope that the internal conflict among the Palestinians end.
All the civilian institutions are opposed to this internal fighting. We call for national unity and for giving up the narrow interests of different factions. We should never allow anyone to be above the law. Everyone should obey the law.
National and Islamic forces organized huge demonstrations that started from Ramallah streets and ended in front of the Palestinian parliament. The crowds condemned the security breakdown and called for pointing the weapons towards the Israeli aggression.
Much of the security breakdown and the lawlessness witnessed on the Palestinian streets are caused by the conduct of some members of the Palestinian Authority forces. They stem from the power struggle between different factions within the Palestinian Authority, who are hereby calling on all concerned parties to refrain from stirring any further violence and lawlessness among Palestinians.
The reasons behind such conflict are the different agendas that different Palestinian factions and groups are trying to impose on the Palestinian Authority prior to the Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. Hamas has requested the formation of a united national agency to hammer out and work out the details of the Israeli pullout from Gaza.
We are not trying to weaken the Palestinian Authority. It is not in anybody's interest to have a weak Palestinian Authority. On the other hand, we are requesting the formation of a higher committee that would strengthen the Palestinian Authority. This committee will work in conjunction with the Palestinian Authority to run and administrate the Palestinian affairs in the Gaza Strip.
Regardless to the reasons that led to the confrontations between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, the outcome of this conflict has caused panic and chaos in the Palestinian streets. What is so strange in all this is that all Palestinian factions and groups are calling on the Palestinian Authority to put an immediate end to the security breakdown, as if this chaos was caused by unknown persons and not by these factions. Majed Saad, Abu Dhabi TV, Ramallah.
Israeli troops have killed 2 Palestinians in a gun battle during a raid near the West Bank town of Jenin. The Israeli military said the army surrounded a building in the village of Yamoun, killing 2 men in an exchange of fire, while 2 others surrendered and were arrested. Palestinians identified the latest victims of an internationally condemned targeted assassinations tactic as members of Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades. Both Al-Aqsa Brigades and Hamas vowed to avenge the killings. Israeli forces also raided a local library in the West Bank town of Bethlehem during another arrest operation of a Palestinian activist. Witnesses said the wanted man took cover in the library but managed to escape before being arrested. Palestinian youths hurled stones at Israeli forces patrolling the streets in renewed internal fighting. Palestinian security forces and Hamas militants fought gun battles in the northern Gaza Strip. 13 people were injured in the recent spate of violence that followed the torching of a Hamas vehicle and 2 pro-Hamas offices in Gaza. Clashes erupted despite efforts by Egyptian mediators to calm the situation after 2 teenage bystanders were killed last week in the worst Palestinian internal violence in years. Hamas and Palestinian officials traded accusations of blame for the latest clashes, which followed President Mahmoud Abbas's warning to militants that he would not tolerate any further fighting with his security forces or attacks on Israel. Palestinian Prime Minister Ahmed Qurayh appealed to all Palestinian forces to control the situation and help restore law and order, saying that would strengthen the Palestinian Authority. And at least 3 people were wounded during a mass protest against Israel's plan to withdraw from Gaza and a corner of the West Bank next month. Scuffles erupted when more than 15,000 demonstrators near the southern Israeli farming village of Kfar Mimoun attempted to make their way past police blockades. Officials pledged to stop them from advancing further towards the Gush Qatif settlement block. Witnesses said at least 20 protesters were arrested when the rally turned violent as demonstrators tried to push their way through several thousand of security personnel deployed at the site of the protest. The Gaza withdrawal has angered right-wingers who vowed to keep up the protest and block the so-called disengagement plan. 3 members of the committee drafting Iraq's constitution have fallen victim to an ongoing deadly insurgency. They were believed to be Sunni members of the committee that is due to deliver the country's new constitution by August 15th. They were shot dead as they left a Baghdad restaurant in the Qarada district of central Baghdad. Earlier, gunmen in 2 cars attacked a minibus bringing workers to a U.S. base, killing 13 people and wounding at least 7 others. The minibus driver and 9 workers from the base were killed in the attack in Baquba, just north of the capital, after gunmen blocked the bus and opened fire. 3 other civilians died when the bus careered into their car. In Samarra, 2 Iraqi soldiers were killed in a clash with gunmen and a joint Iraq-U.S. Army patrol. Another 3 Iraqi soldiers were injured in a bomb blast targeting an Iraqi Army patrol in Al-Mu'tasim area, East Samarra. In Balad, 2 soldiers were killed and a civilian was injured in a bomb blast targeting a joint Iraqi-U.S. military patrol north of the city. Also, 1 civilian was killed north of Baghdad in a bomb blast while he was driving his car on the highway. In Beijing, unknown assailants killed a 39-year-old Iraqi businessman west of the city. British Prime Minister Tony Blair has hosted a summit of UK Muslim leaders calling for the moderate and true voice of Islam to be mobilized. British Muslim leaders and Prime Minister Tony Blair discussed ways to tackle radical Islamists in the wake of the London bombings, but faced a tough task to win round disaffected young Muslims. Senior imams, Muslim politicians and representatives of the Muslim Council of Britain went to Downing Street, where they had an hour-long discussion with Blair. Opposition Conservative Party leader Michael Howard and Liberal Democrats leader Charles Kennedy also attended. But radical Muslims dismissed the meeting as a sham, and even some moderates said they were suspicious of Blair's agenda. Muslim Member of Parliament Shahid Malik said there was a massive appetite among Britain's 1.6 million Muslims to weed out radicals.
I think the feeling was that there is a profound challenge. I think everybody here is up for that challenge. I think we recognise we've got to work better at confronting those evil voices, as minute as they are within our communities. I think we fully understand we've got to work much better with the police and the security services, and that there is a massive appetite up and down this country from within the British Muslim community to take responsibility.
The meeting really revolved around the very strong desire of people from right across the Muslim community in our country, to be united not just in condemnation of the terrible terrorist attacks here in London, but also to confront and deal with head-on the extremism that is based on a perversion of the true faith of Islam, but nonetheless is real within parts of our community here in this country.
Welcome. Lebanon's Prime Minister-designate Fouad Siniora said he hoped to be able to announce the formation of his new government today, a month after the first legislative elections free of Syrian troops. Siniora told reporters after holding consultations with pro-Syrian President Emil Lahoud, they reached an agreement on a 24-member government. Siniora said he would have a new meeting today to announce a new government. In the week since the elections, which gave anti-Syrian group a majority in parliament, Siniora has been scrambling to form a new government in the face of a mounting tensions with Damascus. After failing to form a government of national unity and then a cabinet of technocrats, Siniora said Friday he intended to form a government from a broad spectrum of parties and with the approval of the pro-Syrian Hezbollah Amal alliance. One person was killed in clashes between supporters of former Christian warlord Samir Geagea and local youth from a neighborhood south of Beirut. Geagea's supporters had been celebrating after the Lebanese parliament decided to grant him an amnesty after 11 years in jail. Edith Karam has more.
One person was killed in clashes in Lebanon between supporters of former Christian warlord Samir Geagea and local youth from a Shiite neighborhood south of Beirut. Press reports said fighting flared yesterday between Shiites and Christians who had set off fireworks to celebrate Parliament's decision to grant amnesty to Geagea, who has been serving a life sentence in an isolated prison cell since 1994. The An-Nahar newspaper said gunshots were heard as the two rival groups became locked in fistfights, and one youth was killed while another 16 wounded. Several gunmen from both sides were arrested. The Safir newspaper said the young Shiites were members of the Amal movement, whose leader Nabih Berri is parliament speaker, adding that the army arrested several armed people involved in the clashes. Samir Geagea, the only Lebanese warlord jailed for crimes during the 1975 to 1990 civil war, was amnestied by parliament yesterday after 11 years in jail. Backers of the former anti-Syrian Christian Maronite danced and waved flags of his banned Lebanese forces outside parliament and in streets of Beirut, notably Sissin Square as well as in Sidon. In his northern mountain hometown of Psherri, supporters fired bursts from assault rifles in celebration minutes after the news of his amnesty. The new parliament was elected in June and is dominated by groups that campaigned for the withdrawal of Syrian troops from Lebanon, which took place in April after a 29-year presence. The parliament also voted to amnesty Sunni Muslim militants charged with attacking Lebanese army soldiers and planning attacks against Western targets. Geagea, 52, was expected to be freed by early next week after the amnesty bill is signed by President Emil Lahoud and designated Premier Mikati. Geagea has been in solitary confinement since 1994, serving 4 life sentences, 3 for the murders of political rivals, late Prime Minister Rashid Karami and political heavyweight Dani Sham'oun. He has said the sentences handed down under what were then the pro-Syrian authorities were politically motivated. Geagea's wife Srida, an MP, told reporters outside Parliament that what happened today is a very big dream that we have been waiting for 11 years and 2 months. She thanked her fellow MPs, who she said expressed the will of the Lebanese people to turn the page of the war for good and to move to comprehensive national reconciliation. More than 100 members of the 128-seat parliament voted for the amnesty bill. Hezbollah 13 MPs walked out before the session and did not vote. Geagea's father, Farid, said soon his son would be back as, quote, a king for his followers and for the whole of Lebanon.
Edith Karam takes a look at who is Geagea and what role he played in Lebanese politics.
Geagea was a medicine student at the American University of Beirut while he was an active member of the Phalangist Party, which became the main Christian fighting force upon the outbreak of fighting in 1975. Geagea climbed the ladder of ranks as he led several military operations at the request of Bashir Gemayel, then commander of the Phalangist Party. In 1980, Geagea was appointed the head of the Lebanese Forces Northern Front and later reached the leadership of the party. 3 years later, he led an unsuccessful defense of the Shuf against an onslaught of various militias backed by the Syrian army. In 1986, Geagea became head of the Lebanese forces, a Phalanges-dominated coalition, after staging a coup against Eli Hbeia, who was widely accused of treachery among the Christian community for agreeing to a Syrian-sponsored accord. During the civil war, Geagea inspired devoted followers who saw him as the only man strong and willing enough to protect the Christians. But many Muslims and some Christians saw him as an Israeli-backed warlord who stopped at nothing to keep the government weak and the Maronites dominant. With Israeli support, Geagea gained control of the faction through bloody internal battles, and in 1989 battled arch foe Michel Aoun, the former Lebanese army commander. Aoun went into exile and returned in May, 2 weeks after the last Syrian forces left Lebanon. Geagea's Lebanese Forces Party was dismantled with signing of the 1989 Taif Accord. In 1994, he declined an offered ministerial portfolio and was arrested that same year. Geagea is the only Lebanese warlord jailed for crimes during the 1975 to 1990 civil war. Geagea has been in solitary confinement since 1994, serving 4 life sentences, 3 for the murders of political rivals, one of them a prime minister, and 1 for a failed attempt to kill a minister. He has said the sentences handed down under what were then the pro-Syrian authorities were politically motivated. Human rights groups, including Amnesty International, decried the judicial process leading to his conviction as seriously flawed and politically motivated. 11 years after his detention, and with Syria's grip on Lebanon weakening, calls increased for his release as a step toward national reconciliation. Geagea's release is expected to take place by the end of the week.
Residents in Tripoli were also celebrating, but for a different reason. Yesterday, historic parliamentary session, which granted amnesty to Geagea, also signed a decree for the release of a number of detained militants who were held in prison for the past 5 years on charges of attacking Lebanese army soldiers and planning attacks against Western targets. The militants were charged with endangering state security following deadly clashes in 2000 with the Lebanese army in the northern Diniye area. This bill would also free the suspects of Majd al-Anjar who were involved in an alleged plot to blow up the Italian embassy in Beirut last year. As the announcement of Samir Geagea's amnesty and that of the Diniye detainees was broadcasted across the media spectrum in Lebanon, hundreds of residents from the Baalbek region blocked main roads and burned tires. They protested against an amnesty law which does not include thousands of prisoners who originated from Baalbek and are accused of various petty crimes. The demonstrators threatened to expand their movement, which could extend to other northern regions if their demands are not met. Units of the Lebanese army and internal security forces intervened to reopen roads and control traffic. Head of the future bloc in parliament, MP Saad Hariri, urged President Emil Lahoud to take into account the interest of Lebanon and approve a cabinet lineup that was proposed by Prime Minister-designate Fouad Siniora. MP Hariri also welcomed Parliament's vote to grant amnesty to Lebanese forces leader Samir Geagea and those who were detained in the Diniye and Majd al-Anjar clashes. Meanwhile, Lebanese industrialists and exporters thanked Hariri for helping ease an economic crisis that hit exporters following Syria's closure of the border with Lebanon. Representatives of economic sectors hailed the head of the future bloc in parliament for guaranteeing air and marine transportation routes and reduce rates.
Asked by reporters in Parliament about the reasons behind the delay in forming a new government, MP Saad Hariri said he was surprised that an overwhelming majority in the Assembly supported Prime Minister-designate Fouad Siniora and that the majority in Parliament is being treated as if it did not exist. He pointed to an orchestrated plan aimed at bringing Lebanon to a standstill, citing the backing that the Prime Minister-designate received in Parliament to form a new government, except from some who decided not to participate in the cabinet. He stressed that democratic practice allows for the creation of a government and an opposition that is not represented in it, citing martyred Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri's absence from the government when he was in the opposition camp. He said the late leader never explained his non-participation in sectarian ways, as is the case today. MP Hariri called on President Emil Lahoud to support the formation of a new government since the country is facing major difficulties, including serious closure of its border with Lebanon. Hariri said the Lebanese people, government, army and security forces are ready to do all they can to assist in maintaining security, which has been cited as the reason behind shutting down the border. MP Hariri said that the excuse was exaggerated.
Following news of Samir Geagea's amnesty, former Faux MP-elect Michel Aoun congratulated the Lebanese forces leader, saying he would hopefully be released soon and will shortly take part in Lebanon's political life. In reference to the war he fought against Geagea during the civil war, Aoun said that despite agreeing or disagreeing in politics, they would not fall out again. In reference to the formation of the government, Aoun accused Premier-designate Fouad Siniora of stalling in forming the government in order to escape his responsibilities. Han said he felt Signora was not respecting the constitutional procedures or their negotiations. Han said that neither Signora or MP Saad Hariri had contacted him since the last lineup was proposed to Lahoud, promising to challenge the government if it did not include the number of ministers and portfolios he wants.
أهلا بكم من المدار. ارتفع عدد ضحايا العملية الانتحارية في مدينة المسيب العراقية إلى 98 قتيلا ونحو 100 جريح بعضهم.
The casualties of the recent suicide operation rose to 98 and the number of the injured to 100, some of whom are in critical condition. This is the worst operation since Ibrahim Ja'fari's government took office last April. The suicide attack on Al-Musayib comes only 2 days after a series of suicide explosions occurred in Baghdad, killing at least 30 people.
رائحة الموت تفوح من شوارع مدينة المسيب الواقعة على بعد 70 كيلومترا جنوب العاصمة العراقية بغداد. 200 شخص بين قتيل وجريح.
The smell of death is everywhere in the streets of Musayib, 70 kilometers of Baghdad. 200 people were either killed or injured in the suicide operation near an oil tanker in a crowded market, which explains the high number of civilian casualties. This attack is the first of its kind in Al-Musayib, but the post-Saddam Iraq has witnessed many of these bloody attacks. Often, the Al-Qaeda organization in the land of the two rivers, led by the Jordanian national Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi, declares responsibilities for these attacks. But the residents of Al-Musayib who participated in the funeral procession of their relatives expressed their anger towards the Iraqi police, accusing them of being complacent on the attacker by allowing him to enter the heart of the Shiite-dominated city. The catastrophe also dominated the Iraqi parliament meeting, which explains why some parliament members put the blame on the Minister of Defense and Minister of Interior because they failed to stop the attacks or improve the deteriorating conditions in the country. The strict security measures that were taken since Ibrahim Ja'fari's government took office 3 months ago did not stop the suicide bombers from reaching their targets in Baghdad and other Iraqi cities. More than 40,000 Iraqi police and soldiers have been stationed in Baghdad, but the attackers still managed to go through all the checkpoints with their booby-trapped cars easily. Further attacks took place in the heart of Baghdad, killing and injuring dozens of security forces and citizens, only 48 hours after the series of explosions erupted in Baghdad, killing 30 people.
تحركت هذا اليوم سرية الأولى بقيادة البطل نقيب خضر لتأمين طريق.
Today, one brigade led by Sergeant Khadr was mobilized to secure the Mashtal intersection. When they arrived there, they were attacked by Arabs, including a Sudanese national.
تصريح يحمل اتهاما بأن منفذي العمليات الانتحارية ليسوا عراقيين.
This statement implies that the perpetrators of these attacks are not Iraqis. Iraqi government and American forces have been repeating the same accusation for a long time. It is believed that the armed foreigners have come to Iraq through neighboring countries, creating a nightmare for both the Iraqi government and American officials. All military operations conducted by the occupation forces in north and western Baghdad failed to eliminate the presence of armed groups led by Arabs. Moreover, recently a statement attributed to Al-Qaeda organization in the land of the two rivers said that some of the suicide attacks were carried out by Iraqi citizens. Some observers believe that this is an attempt by al-Zarqawi to recruit more Iraqis to his organization in order to expand his attacks in the next stage.
Iraqi Deputy Prime Minister Dr. Ahmed Shalabi visited victims of the terror attack that took place in the town of Al-Musayib. Dr. Shalabi instructed officials at Al-Musayib Hospital to provide the best care possible to the injured. He also called on the Iraqis to support the Iraqi security forces to enable them to get a grip on the security situation. In abiding by government officials' slogan of "From the people, for the people," the Iraqi Deputy Prime Minister visited the victims of al-Mosaic terror attack, which killed and injured tens of Iraqis.
We are here to show support and solidarity to victims and their families of the terror attack, which took place 2 days ago in the peaceful city of Al-Musab. This attack was carried out by criminal terrorists and resulted in tens of Iraqi casualties. We condemn this terror attack, and we will not allow such acts of terror to drag us into a full-scale war between different Iraqi groups and sectors. The Iraqi people are mature, and we will win the war on terrorism.
To shed light on the problems facing the Iraqi security forces, Dr. Shalabi took a closer look at some of the plans being drafted to derail and prevent the infiltration of terrorists into Iraq from neighboring countries.
We tell our neighboring countries that Iraq is a great nation. The Iraqi people will remember who supported them during these current crises. We are hereby calling on our neighboring countries to control their borders and to prevent terrorists from crossing over to Iraq. While the Iraqi people are going through these crises, they are monitoring the situation carefully.
The Deputy Prime Minister did not waste the opportunity to take a first-hand look at some of the new economic and service projects. He also visited the site of the new electricity company in the town of Al-Musayyib, which is at the completion phase. Muhammad Al-Khafiji, Al-Iraqiyya, Baghdad.
God, the compassionate, the merciful. Hello, welcome to today's edition of English News on Jam Network with me, Mariam Zolghadr. Presided over by President Mohammad Khatami, the very first Supreme Aerospace Council met on Tuesday, also attended by IT and Communication Minister Ahmad Mutamidi, Defense Minister Shamkhani, and Transport Minister Rahmati. The outgoing president told the gathering Iran's presence at the aerospace arena is a major step in attaining sustainable development and national might. The meeting also set a close eye on the fourth National Development Plan in aerospace, as well as research and communication satellites. The final ratification of these bylaws is yet to be placed in the fourth development plan. Earlier in the day, President Khatami told a gathering of university chancellors, quote, "We should know who our enemies are and defend our principles and values vis-à-vis those enemies." The outgoing president reaffirmed that the adversaries of a country tend to impede its progress at any cost, especially if the people in that country adhere to religious teachings in their development drive. The president went on to say any government that comes to power anyone needs to pay special attention to the educated class, along with promotion of science and research. Interior ministers from states neighboring Iraq wrapped up their second conference on Tuesday in Istanbul, Turkey, releasing a joint statement. The declaration calls for respect to Iraq's territorial integrity and solidarity and denounces terrorism in all its forms. Interior ministers of Iraq's neighbors also raised issues such as campaign against terrorism and restoration of security to the water in Iraq.
The views expressed on Mosaic are not those of Link TV or its sponsors, but of the broadcasters themselves. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.